Thanks for joining us tonight on another episode of The Racing Report. My name is Rob Peeters, and I am your host once again for another fabulous little half hour where we're going to talk all things motorsports because, believe me, NASCAR just put on one of the best races of the year this past weekend at the Echo Park Speedway, formerly known as the Atlanta Motor Speedway. But that wasn't the only race that was in action this past weekend. We also had Supercars down in Townsville, 3 different winners across all 3 races. Then we also had sports car extravaganzas. We had IMSA out in Canadian Tire Motorsports Park. And then we also had the WEC hold the 6 hours of Sao Paulo. And on top of all of that, we've got tons of news to get to as well. So let's go ahead and move on from the formalities and the intro of the show and move on into the news segment. And we'll begin, as always, with Formula One because we got some very interesting perspective and also a candid interview from Sergio Perez this past week. Perez made an appearance on the High Performance podcast, which I highly recommend checking out. It might be one of my favorites this past week. And he told a story about his arrival at Red Bull back in 2021. Now, according to Sergio Perez, he said that Christian Horner told him point blank that the team only ran the second car out of necessity and that it would have preferred to just race with Max Verstappen. But, you know, as in Formula One, you have to enter 2 cars. And so Red Bull basically thinks that entering a second car is just not really something they want to do. At least that was the opinion under Christian Horner. Obviously, he's no longer running that team day to day. But Perez went on to say that the team's entire infrastructure was actually built around and has been built around Max Verstappen, which maybe could explain why the team is not the way, maybe on the same level as it was previous years, because obviously new management coming in, maybe they got rid of all of that infrastructure that was set up around Verstappen. Now, here's something else Perez said that was very interesting during the podcast. He also claimed, that the gap between both him and Verstappen continued to grow with each technical upgrade. So they were definitely giving Verstappen the better stuff, at least this is according to Sergio Perez, and giving Perez basically the scraps or the not-so-good upgrades. But despite hearing all of this, you might think, well, boy, does he hold a grudge? Well, no, he doesn't, actually. He was very thankful for his time with Red Bull, and he noted that he doesn't hold any animosity toward Red Bull following his departure, so at least you can put that to bed and say, no, Perez was not mad at Red Bull at all. He was very thankful for his time. He's just speaking candidly about how his experience was, which I think is unique to him, and also a very interesting look into just how Red Bull Formula One operates throughout the 2020 so far. But on that note, let's go ahead and move into the next piece of Formula One news, and that is that Williams team principal James Vowles said this past week that the upgrades that the team brought to the British Grand Prix did not meet their expectations. Now, that was revealed in a recent Q&A that was posted by the Williams YouTube channel. Highly recommend checking that out. He does those pretty much after almost every race, I believe. But yeah, definitely kind of concerning. Of course, there is still some hope for Williams going on the line. They've still got some upgrades coming, but the upgrades that they brought to Silverstone did not meet their expectations, so I'm very curious to see, because I think they're supposed to bring some upgrades to Azerbaijan and Baku. Very curious to see what kind of upgrades they bring then and see if maybe that fixes the problems that they've been having and if they can maybe get a little bit more speed out of that car. And I do remember this week, unlike last week, that the Williams drivers are Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. I'm not going to forget that this time. Never going to forget it again. Moving on, Audi team principal Mattia Binotto says that he is targeting the 2030 season as the target season for the team to start competing for world championships. He also noted that the 2028 season is when the team expects to make a, quote, further leap in quality. So, if you're an Audi fan, you have something to look forward to now over the next 4 years, and even possibly within the next 2. We'll see if that all pans out. Obviously, Formula One has quite the midfield battle, but competing in the top is quite a tall task, so we'll see if they're up for it. Finally, McLaren says it will run a new rear wing assembly this weekend at Spa for the Belgian Grand Prix. The team was initially supposed to debut that new rear wing on Lando Norris's car at the Austrian Grand Prix, but a hydraulic issue forced the plan to be scrapped until this weekend. So possibly we have McLaren bringing an upgrade to Spa. Hopefully that helps. It's going to be it's a fast track. Maybe that rear wing will make for a better straight mode. Maybe, perhaps, we'll see. Who knows? But on that note, let's go ahead here now and move on into the world of IndyCar, because we've got a little bit to talk about here before we go to Nashville coming up this weekend. First and foremost, iRacing has announced that the new IndyCar game has been delayed until next year. That is not the news I think a lot of people were hoping for, but also kind of the news that I think most of us expected. We hadn't gotten any news, and I think for myself as a gamer and also a motorsports journalist, I think looking at that, you can kind of piece together that as soon as they didn't have anything for the Indy 500, it was likely going to be delayed or already had been delayed, and now we know for certain that it will not come out until next year. Though, they did say early 2027 is when the game is scheduled to launch, and it will launch on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, as well as the Xbox One, which surprised me. No PS4 port, but an Xbox One port. That is interesting to me. But it'll also get a PC release via Steam. Of course, additional details, as well as whether or not the game will feature a physical release, were not disclosed. And the only reason I mention that is because NASCAR 25, and I believe even NASCAR 26, will not have physical releases at any time. So it begs the question, will this game have a physical release? Especially since we got the news not long ago that Sony is phasing out physical disc production. So perhaps they could put one out on Xbox Series X and Xbox One, but it's entirely possible the game could be all digital altogether, which in my opinion, again, my opinion is not the way that we need to be going as a society, as gamers, as anything. But of course, Sony is making that decision for us. I could go on in detail, but I won't. Instead, we'll talk about something else that's totally not controversial at all, right? Depending on what side of the political spectrum you fall on. But David Malukas, Alex Palou, and Felix Rosenquist visited the White House on Monday ahead of the upcoming Freedom 250. That will take place around the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Roger Penske, U.S. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy, Fox Sports CEO Eric Shanks, and President of General Motors Mark Rose were also on hand for the announcement for the press conference / event. In addition to President Trump, they also had a demonstration of a IndyCar pit stop as well. It was really more of a PR kind of thing, not really announcing much. I mean, we already know what's going to happen with it, but kind of more of a, hey, don't forget that this event is happening. Check it out coming up later on in August. And they've got, I believe, from the announcement, I think it was 41 days from the announcement, from that press conference until the start of the race. So looks like it's coming along. I'll still be curious to see what that circuit is going to look like and how it races when we get there coming up here in another month's time. And as we talked about earlier in this show, probably about around the intro, we've got the IndyCar race is coming to the Nashville Superspeedway this weekend. And I will be there in attendance, and I'm excited. But of course, the one big thing that most fans and now drivers and teams as well are wondering about is, when is this race gonna start? Because it's got a tentative 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time or 4:30 p.m. local time start, but it all depends on when the World Cup final ends. So, as you may or may not be aware, the World Cup final will feature Spain and Argentina, and these World Cups tend to go into extra time or even down to penalty kicks. So, there is an entire possibility that this race is scheduled to tentatively start at 5:35 p.m., 5:35, but it could be pushed back as many as 40 to 60 minutes later, so possibly even an hour's worth of delay. They are not going to start this race until the final whistle blows on the World Cup. They're probably not even going to start pre-race ceremonies until that final whistle blows. So it's kind of made a lot of drivers wonder what is going on here, and especially given the fact that this track is concrete. It races very different than most other tracks, and most drivers can tell you when you're trying to set up the car, you're preparing for a very specific type of track condition. And so the driver is going to be going into practice and qualifying, setting up for what should be a 5:30 Eastern time start. But if that ends up going as far back as to 6:30, a lot more of the race is going to be run under the lights than maybe once was anticipated. So these drivers and teams are going to have that extra challenge of trying to set up their cars for a tentative start time that we're not exactly sure when it's going to happen. What I do know is that will be a very interesting challenge and could pose for a lot of different strategies going on. And you could see a lot of drivers having to come in and make pit stops early in order to adjust the handlings of their race car, make wing adjustments, make tire pressure adjustments, all that kind of stuff. As well as, let's not forget, they've also bringing the alternate tire, so you will have to run a set of primaries and a set of alternates at this oval race. So that also should be interesting to see how the drivers and teams adapt to that when you kind of have a weird, we don't really know when we're going to start racing window, and you kind of have to be prepared for the race could run the majority under the daylight hours, or it could run a larger portion under the nighttime hours than originally expected. All that will be determined. We'll see that when we get to it on Sunday. But on that note, let's go ahead here and take our first break of the show. And when we come back, we're going to break down all the news and notes in the world of supercars, as well as in the world of NASCAR. So, more Racing Report coming up after these messages. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Racing Report. My name is Rob Peeters. Thanks again so much for sticking with us through that break. Of course, I always appreciate it when you guys do and don't flip away because it's probably easy to do that during commercial. But on that note, let's go ahead here as we teased before we went to break the Supercars news of the week. Not a lot, but still something to discuss, and this is very important when it comes to what the series could look like next season. Speed Cafe reports that current Supercars CEO Barclay Nettlefold met with team representatives over the weekend to negotiate its team's racing charter. Now, if you're not familiar with the team's racing charter, I will explain that here shortly. But Nettlefold presented the plan, which would see the calendar expand to 14 races in 2027 and then 15 races in 2028. Now, Phillip Island is expected to join the calendar with a late season date, replacing Queensland Raceway. So that's something to note here. Queensland Raceway, more likely than not, will be done as a Supercars venue for the indefinite future. But here's what the team's racing charter essentially is. It determines what the series must pay the teams each season with a base payment for 12 events plus an additional fee for each event beyond that. So what basically is going on here is if they can't reach an agreement, the series is going to go back down to 12 rounds, and everybody kind of agrees that that's not exactly where we want to go. But here's the other thing that you have to keep in mind, is what this also does is it determines how much money is being distributed to the team. So think about the charter systems in both NASCAR and IndyCar. Very similar kind of like that. It's almost a one-to-one similarity, but there are obviously some significant differences just because those racing series and supercars operate kind of on different models, though they're very similar. They're also different. So it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's very similar. Now, what this essentially means is when they want to increase that number, they're going to have to come up with more money to pay the teams, kind of like revenue sharing. And it is essentially revenue sharing, I should say. And so when the series is talking about that, they need to negotiate how much extra money is going to go to those teams in order for this to happen. Now, the teams are trying to get a little bit more money out of the series so that they're not 100%, not as reliant on sponsorship as maybe they currently are. But they're also admitting that the series going to 12 events is not the right step, and they want to work something out. So we'll see what ends up happening here coming up in probably the next couple of months, and we'll keep you updated right here on the Racing Report with what's going on with the Supercars teams racing charters. So those negotiations are going on, and of course, it's also important to note that the series can't afford to give all their money. Of course, the new TV deal does help, but they can't afford to give all that money away without being able to invest it in the series and also still pay for other expenses and day-to-day expenses as well, and just, breaking even and whatnot. So they have to negotiate something, but we'll see if something gets done and see what the calendar looks like next year as soon as we know it and as soon as it is announced. But now let's take a look here real quick onto the NASCAR news. There is not as much as there has been the last couple of weekends, but still plenty to discuss this week. NASCAR has announced it is changing the aerodynamic package for the upcoming Coke Zero Sugar 400 at Daytona next month. Here's basically what you need to understand. They're going to shorten the spoiler from 7 inches down to 4 inches. The tapered spacer will now reduce horsepower from 510 to 465. There will also be new spoiler braces, and a spoiler deflection device will be redesigned to accommodate the 4-inch spoiler. Now, when I say this, you might hear, oh my gosh, they're reducing horsepower. Well, yes, but they're also reducing drag. So when you reduce drag, you're still going to gain more speed. So what they're trying to do is they're reducing that horsepower so that the speed gained by the reduction in drag is not overwhelming. Now, they do expect the cars to be slightly faster, maybe about 2 to 3 miles an hour by themselves, maybe about 5 miles an hour faster in the pack. So it's not like these cars are going to be going any slower than they currently are at Daytona and Talladega, but it's just going to make the racing a little bit different and make it, instead of being 2x2 gridlock, hopefully we'll get to see something a little bit closer to what we saw at Atlanta. Though, unfortunately, Daytona is just not as rough as Atlanta, so it might not be a 1-to-1, but NASCAR is definitely trying something with this new super speedway package. And like I said, if it gets us anywhere close to what we saw at Atlanta, I would consider it a success no matter what. And now let's talk about more NASCAR news. According to the Sports Business Journal, NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell says that the series still has global ambitions and recently hired former UFC Ultimate Fighting Championship Senior Vice President Adam Layton to a role that will evaluate event operations and revenue generation for its 3 national series in the United States, as well as, quote, international circuits. That is the SBJ. O'Donnell also said that NASCAR is currently looking at some of those international races in Canada, England, as well as the greater part of Europe. So where that stands still is TBA. Don't have enough to even speculate on it, but that is something I would check out if you are reading SBJ, Sports Business Journal. Definitely a good article there. In some sponsorship news with NASCAR races, Atlanta Motor Speedway has announced that Dollar Tree will sponsor next year's 400-mile race in the summer, replacing Quaker State. So we had the Quaker State 400 this past weekend at Atlanta. Next year, that same race will be known as the Dollar Tree 400. Good to note there. And finally, NASCAR has announced that there will be a public celebration of life for Kyle Busch, and that will take place at Charlotte Motor Speedway on October 9th, following the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race. So fans in Charlotte will thankfully get an opportunity to celebrate Kyle Busch's life with other NASCAR fans as in a setting that is specifically tailored for that at Charlotte Motor Speedway. And on that note, let's go ahead here and take our second and final break of the show. And when we come back, we're going to detail everything that happened in this most recent weekend of racing. And then we're going to get you set up and ready for all the races that are coming up this weekend. Lots to talk about. No shortage of racing. Again, we've got NASCAR, Formula One, IndyCar. It's all in action this weekend, so you won't want to miss any of that as we preview it. So, more Racing Report coming up after these messages. Don't go anywhere. And we're back on the Racing Report. Thanks again so much for sticking with us through that break. We got a big final segment here in store for you today, and that's going to start with the weekend recap, which was, again, action-packed despite maybe not as many races as we've got on the docket for this weekend. We still had a split weekend in NASCAR. The Cup Series and the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series were both in Atlanta. Let me tell you something, that O'Reilly Auto Parts Series race could not have been any more chaotic. And who ended up getting the victory? None other than Justin Allgaier, who, by the way, has not only clinched his spot in the chase, he's also clinched the regular season championship. Clinched the regular season championship. There's still 3 races left in the chase. He's already clinched it. Still 3 races. That is how dominant Justin Allgaier's season has been this season. And in no way, shape, or form is that anything to balk about. I mean, he's sitting here talking not long ago, like he's sitting here talking at the beginning of the year, I might retire. This might be my last year. And now he's clocked off 6 race victories. He's locked himself into the chase. He's locked himself as the regular season champion. And which means he's now set up to likely carry himself all the way to the actual championship at Homestead, which would be something incredible because, again, being the regular season champion gives you a huge points buffer when the chase actually starts. So Justin Allgaier is in really good shape, and if you were a Justin Allgaier fan, you might be on cloud 9 right now looking at what your driver is doing. It is a great day there, and again, a chaotic but fun race in the O'Reilly Auto Parts Series at Atlanta, I should say. But then the Cup Series race was also just as exciting. I mean, some of the best racing I've seen all year in NASCAR, and it came courtesy of New Atlanta, which is something that I think a lot of people, myself included, were very skeptical about ever happening when they repaved this thing back in 2021. And by the 2022 season, admittedly, it was it was very smooth, and now it's not smooth, and now the racing is entertaining as heck. And Ryan Blaney, let me tell you something about Ryan Blaney, arguably had the fastest car out there all race long, just flat out quicker than everybody else. He even got put into the wall. Bubba Wallace got him into the wall a little bit. He was not too happy about that because a caution came out a little bit later for an unrelated incident, and Blaney gave Bubba his 2 cents on how that went down. But even after getting into the wall, you still could not slow down that 12 car. There was nothing on the planet that was going to stop Ryan Blaney from winning that race. And it was a thrilling race. You had lots of different drivers up front mixing it up, and the cream was rising to the top. There was no drivers in the top 15 that you thought didn't really deserve to be there. Everybody who was up there was a race winner, a perennial race winner, past champion. Everybody was racing for the win that should have been racing for the win, and I think that's what made that race all that more entertaining. And as much as I like underdog victories, I do think that the amount that we've seen them happen at places like Daytona and Talladega has kind of spoiled their specialness just a little bit. So it was almost refreshing to kind of not see any of that up at the front, though not to say that it's bad or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it's got a different vibe nowadays. So there's a lot to look forward to there when we come back to Atlanta again, coming up next February, probably next February, maybe even March. Who knows when that race will fall. But definitely, if you missed out, check out the highlights. There's no shortage of them. But then, while the Cup and the O'Reilly Series were down in Atlanta, you had some East Coast racing with the ARCA Menard Series and the Craftsman Truck Series. Thomas Annunziata dominated that ARCA race, completely dominated it and made it his own. And then I thought he was going to compete and probably win the truck race, and he could have. He had a fast truck, and he knew that track probably better than most people in the field. And unfortunately, while I think he was running second under a caution, the truck caught fire. Just completely caught fire, unfortunately resulted in Annunziata being hospitalized, though he has thankfully been released and is okay. He's checked and cleared and released, which is good. But that was a very scary incident, and it did kind of set up for an interesting run to the finish where if you put money on Grant Enfinger to win on a road course, I would like to formally ask you for tomorrow's Powerball numbers, if you wouldn't mind. I would really, really appreciate me if you could get me those Powerball numbers, because I could use a little bit more money right about now, and I don't know how anybody picked Grant Enfinger to win on a road course. Not saying he's not capable of doing it, it's just not his background. It's not his forte, it's not his bread and butter, but he is obviously very good on road courses, and so he was a bit of a sleeper. Still came out and won that race. How about it? What a great event. Supercars were in Townsville, as we talked about. 3 different winners in all 3 races. Cam Waters winning the race in race 1, Matt Payne winning race 2, and then Brody Kostecki scoring the victory in race 3. Had a bit of a interesting celebration where he hit the wall. But hey, you're celebrating because it had been a while for Brody. So IMSA was at Canadian Tire Motorsports Park in LMP2, which was the only prototype class competing that weekend. Inter-Europole of Tom Dillman and Jeremy Clark were the victors there. In GTD Pro, Vassar Sullivan took the checkered flag first with Ben Barnicoat and Jack Hawksworth, while in GTD it was Windward Racing of Russell Ward and Philip Ellis. In the WEC, they had the 6 hours of Sao Paulo. Kevin Magnussen, not long ago, was racing in a NASCAR Cup car at Coronado Naval Base, goes down and runs a hypercar for BMW in Sao Paulo and wins. That's right, BMW M Team WRT was the victors at the 6 hours of Sao Paulo this weekend. Kevin Magnussen, Rafael Maricero, and Dries Van Thor were the victors there. And then in LMGT3, it was Racing Team Turkey with pilots Peter Dempsey, who you might remember from winning the closest Freedom 100 ever, and then Charlie Eastwood and Salia Uluk were those victors there. Let's take a quick look real quick at some of the races that are coming up this weekend. No shortage of it again. We've got Formula One in town at Spa-Francorchamps for the Belgian Grand Prix. That is set for Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, of course, on Apple TV. And then Formula 3 has their sprint race Saturday at 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Their feature race is set for Sunday at 2:30 a.m., so it's going to be an early morning for feeder series this week. Formula 2 sprint race is set for Saturday at 8:15 a.m., so maybe not as early as that, but their feature race is scheduled for Sunday at 4 a.m., so again, going to be a little bit early if you're a fan of feeder series, but the NASCAR Cup Series and the Truck Series are in North Wilkesboro. The O'Reilly Auto Parts Series is off until next weekend at Indianapolis, but the truck race is scheduled for Saturday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That'll be on FS1, while the Cup race is going to be a night race starting at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Sunday. That'll, of course, be on TNT. IndyCar is in Nashville. Again, we talked about the tentative start time for that, but we do know that the Indy Next race will start on time at 1 o'clock Eastern Time on FS1 on Sunday with the Borchetta Bourbon 400. They're calling it the Borchetta Bourbon Music City Grand Prix. It's the Borchetta Bourbon 400 to me. I'm just going to call it that. But that is scheduled for around 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, of course, on Big Fox. NHRA is in Sonoma. You can catch those on FS1. And then Super Formula is in Fuji. First Super Formula race in a couple of months. Race 1 is set for Saturday at 3:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Race 2, which is again the makeup from Autopolis earlier this year, where that race was washed out entirely, that is set for Saturday at 9:05 p.m. Eastern Time, with race 3 set for Sunday at 2:35 a.m. Eastern Time. The Cars Tour is in North Wilkesboro this week as well. We've got Friday at 5 o'clock on Flow Racing, while the Cars Tour West is at State Line Speedway Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Flow. Thank you again so much, guys, for watching this week's episode of The Racing Report. We really appreciate it. We'll be back next week for a comprehensive, detailed analysis of all those races I just mentioned, as well as the latest news and notes in the world of motorsports. So, for WTHR Plus, my name is Rob Peeters, and this has been another episode of The Racing Report.